I would rather people get healthcare screenings and treat prophylactically, prevention, versus treating when they have an issue. That would be better for society in total.
We are joined by Gaslightwala, who is a friend and has recently joined as President and Chief Executive Officer at Akari Therapeutics. Abizer has a very established track record for leading a portfolio of products that have total annual sales of $1 billion.
Innovation is great, but innovation sitting on a shelf on a bench doesn't do anyone any good.
What are the things that are keeping you awake at night when it comes to commercializing novel therapeutics?
I think there's a perception by people that the healthcare industry has a bit of cynicism by many people who are in it, and that they don't have a fair access and equity. How do we make sure that healthcare is accessible? Let's not attack certain players. Let's try to think about how there's solutions that need to be created in a way that's beneficial for everyone to benefit.
Very excited about today's episode. We are joined by Abizer Gaslightwala, who is a friend and has recently joined as President and Chief Executive Officer at Akari Therapeutics. Prior to Akari, Abizer served as the SVP and franchise head for U.S. Oncology at Jazz Pharmaceuticals. Abizer has a very established track record for leading a portfolio of products spanning both solid and hematological malignancies that have total annual sales of $1 billion. He's held several executive leadership roles at Amgen, Pfizer, J&J, across a multitude of brands. Abizer, congratulations. I'm so excited to have you on the episode today and for the discussion. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Abizer, I have to start with this question. Tell me more about your background. I want everybody to understand the true human that you are, and really for people to understand, in addition to your background, what it is that led you to the life sciences industry.
Yeah, sure, Chase. Well, depending how far back, it's an interesting journey. Happy to tell it. Let me try to give a fairly concise version. So I'm an engineer by training, did my chemical engineering, ended up doing some graduate work where I did my chemical engineering MBA school. But I think the reason I kind of ended up in life sciences is even before I went to college, I had this aspiration of being in the life sciences field. You know, one obvious way is to be a physician and treat patients. But I knew for whatever number of reasons, that wasn't exactly, I knew my calling in life. I knew that when I went to college, I did not want to go to med school, but I wanted to find some way to be in the life sciences area. And I love science and math. And so I ended up doing my engineering degree because I thought it was a great way to continue that science and math education. Ended up taking a job actually not in the traditional engineering of chemicals, but more in consumer products. I think I had a calling of those had a more human feel to them, working on products. And my first job out of college wasn't hardcore life sciences. I was helping to make, really products that impacted patients and people and babies. Baby shampoo, baby lotion, creams. I worked for Johnson & Johnson Consumer Products. And it was a fun job. It was a different application of chemical engineering in a different way to make products that impacted people and consumers on a day-to-day basis. And it was an amazing experience. And one of the things I learned more at J&J was, as J&J was also a pharmaceutical company, I got to learn through the adjacent companies, observing what that pharma sector did. And that's where I started to kind of coalesce my interest in life sciences with engineering and math with business, and to be like, wow, there's this whole area of pharmaceuticals and life sciences, and it combines really high level science, innovation, how you bring innovation and science to the market, but in a way that impacts people in product therapies, like therapeutics that work in many different diseases. So I kind of had that view when I went back to graduate school. And that's why I just didn't want to do my MBA. I wanted to be in the more commercial business side, so hence I did the MBA, but I wanted to still have that leg in the science side. So I found a dual degree program to help me kind of do that. So I didn't have to make a choice. That's why I did my chemical engineering, but with a focus on how, manufacturing of proteins and therapeutics are made, but did my MBA as well and simultaneously. And that kind of helped me launch into my aspiration of going to life sciences. So I kind of tell that as I always had this passion for life sciences. It wasn't in the traditional way of being a physician. It kind of got to this place of getting into the life sciences area through a gradual kind of evolution. And that's, I think, really important for anyone in life. You have an idea where you want to go, but you're not exactly trying to get there. You have to try a couple of different experiences you learn from them, you learn how to orient yourself to where you want to go. And then when I did find my passion and eventually after graduate school, a role in the life sciences industry, that's where I spent over the last 20, 25 years building a lot of cumulative experiences on how we actually bring medicines to market and make an impact to patients. And the most important thing is that innovation is great, but innovation sitting on a shelf or on a bench doesn't do anyone any good. So it's super important to take that innovation and find ways to bring it to patients. And that's where I've really enjoyed my experiences in the life science industry.
No, that's incredible. I mean, there's a few key themes that you hit on. One is the fact that you've had exposure to the consumer realm, of course, as an engineer by training at Johnson and Johnson, and really the second, which is the fact that it's. I always like to say that should innovation, any type of new technology or even a new drug that's created, if patients and doctors don't know about it, it might as well not even exist because, again, they don't even know it exists. So they're not even going to be able to benefit the most from it. How does that translate to how you think about the commercial approach you're taking on oncology?
Yeah, it's absolutely the number one imperative that innovation, again, sitting in a vacuum does no one any good. And so, I take that as an example of a really exciting product we launched. It's a next generation bispecific antibody. I know there's a lot of technical jargon, but what we think it targets is really important oncogene or driver of cancer called HER2. And people know about HER2. They've heard of a product called Herceptin in the past, super impactful, important product to treat these HER2 cancers. Well, we've launched the next generation product. And I think that's to your point of making sure that the awareness and the education is out there. It's been super important for us. We just got on this launch at the end of the fourth quarter last year, and we're in the very beginning of it. But that in particular, helping people realize they think they know, and physicians and nurses and payers and administrators and ultimately patients, maybe you've heard about HER2, but this is a new way to think about HER2 therapy. And why is it important? And are you testing for this? And are you then using that test to guide therapy? And even though you may have thought that the older generation of HER2 therapies weren't sufficient to treat some of these newer diseases, this is why you should relook at that. And if we don't get that message out, it's like anything in life. People have preconceived ideas, information, and biases. And biases are not bad or good. They're just how we learn and that how we store information and how we make decisions. And so, how do we make sure people are using the latest information to rechange their biases and thinking? And that's what we do. Like, if we're not out there doing that, then people might not know they have a new option. They may not be able to present it to patients. Patients may not be able to consider it. And that's a loss. That's a loss for those patients ultimately in terms of the impact they could have for this new product. So, yeah, it's critically important that we are out there educating. And even though people have a base of knowledge, things change. Things change every day and every minute. So it's our job to make sure that the people that we work with who treat cancer patients have the best information at their fingertips, at their knowledge, at their disposal to make the best decisions for treatment.
And I just want to, there's some patients that listen to this. I want to give a quick explanation. The way I like to think about HER2, if we were to boil it down to basics from a scientific perspective, is if you can imagine for a second that your body's cells are like cars, and think of HER2 as the gas pedal within the cars, right? In normal cells, what HER2 does is it helps the cell grow and divide at the right speed. And that's just like pressing the gas pedal just enough to drive normally. When HER2 positive, in the case of HER2 positive cancer cells, on the other hand, there's obviously too many HER2 receptors. And this is like having a stuck gas pedal, making the cells grow and divide too fast, which is ultimately what results in tumor formation. For some of you out there that know what HER2 is, I apologize for that seemingly basic explanation, but that is the analogy that has always come into my mind for HER2. And obviously, there's some really incredible medicines being scientists have developed some pretty incredible therapeutics called targeted therapies that really act to break down and even slow down or stop cancer cells. And again, that's just my high level explanation for her too, and why it's important.
And Chase, I just want to spend a minute because we are at a revolution in cancer and many other disease areas, even outside of cancer, in terms of these next generation targeted therapies, specificity beyond what we even thought 10, 20 years ago. So I think it speaks to the amazing place we are as in the science and the research and the innovation that's happening in life sciences. However, as amazing as innovation is, I think what you just did is super important. If we can't translate how people understand that at all levels, whether you're a physician, a nurse practitioner, a patient, a payer, then it's lost on what the value and the benefit is. And so I think we often get a little bit caught up in the technical jargon of our products and what they do. And we sometimes don't spend enough time talking about what the issues are, the problem statement, and how some of these therapies are addressing that problem in a different, better way. And so it's super important that we just make sure we communicate in an easy way to understand it, because all the technical stuff doesn't matter. At the end of the day, people need therapies and solutions that get them to a better place. And how do we let people understand what those therapies are and if that's a good choice for them?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, without getting too deep on that category, I mean, you know where I stand on how do we address some of the health literacy challenges.
Yeah.
Ultimately, at the end of the day, obviously, we're both scientists, and we have to assume that even within the scientific community, everybody has a different health literacy in terms of the level that they're at when it comes down to learning about a new therapeutic treatment option. Unless you're treating a patient day to day that might have that condition, you might require more information to better understand exactly how that therapeutic treatment option works. And that's just another critical component to how we think about next generation mechanisms for drug commercialization. Out of curiosity, Beezer, what are the things that are keeping you awake at night when it comes to commercializing novel therapeutics like the one that we're talking about right here, the oncology side?
Yeah, I think as exciting time as you are with the science and the therapies, we're in an interesting place, I think, as a society, not just even in the US, I think globally around how healthcare is viewed, and not say increasing cynicism around what companies who are in the healthcare business do. And, it is a business, for right or for wrong. It is a business. It is a for-profit driven business. If you believe in that, ultimately we get better products and innovation out of that because we've made it for-profit industry, and it provides the incentives for people to take big risk with R&D, with capital. And R&D is the lifeblood of our industry. We have no new products, and unless there's this kind of incentive to reward, which is for-profit companies, we wouldn't have the level of risk and risk taking, because for every one product that we bring to market, there are at least 10 at a certain stage that fail, and hundreds before that fail even further. And all those R&D costs have to be recouped by the ones that actually get to market. And so I think in general, it's hard to explain that and contextualize that. So I think there's a perception by people that the healthcare industry, has a bit of cynicism by many people who are in it, and that they don't have a fair access and equity. And I think those are specifically structural problems we need to fix as a society. And it's not that the pharmaceutical or life science industry doesn't have a role, but it's only one player of many. This is a kind of societal problem of structurally, how do we make sure that healthcare is accessible, not just drug therapies, but actual diagnosis, screening of cancer and other therapies, treatment available, healthcare, social determinants of healthcare as well. Do people have the support services? Do they have the access to the healthcare? Do they have the health literacy to understand the choices they make? I think one of the most profound things when you look at cancer care in general, in the US in particular, you find a dramatic reduction in cancer, deaths, and a dramatic increase in survival and quality of life in not just one tumor, but many different types of tumors. And, around that span, and you have to ask, well, what is the driving force? Well, it's not just one factor. Yeah, we brought some amazing therapies to market across many tumors, but it's much better screening. It's much better education. When you catch cancer early, you have a much better chance of defeating it. So you see, there's a lot of public awareness campaigns around smoking and how it relates to lung cancer. you see that's had a dramatic impact in a positive way of reducing lung cancer rates in the last 20 years in this country and worldwide. And so I say that, we as an industry, how do we be part of the solution with governments, with other players, with health organizations around creating awareness around diagnosis, screening, treatment, and then in particular, when appropriate, how do we bring the best science and therapies for treatment when necessary for patients? And how do we ensure that access is there? And it's not just us as an industry, but through the healthcare system, the delivery of healthcare. There are many players, and it's a complex problem. I don't profess to have the answers, but I think we just as a society have to make sure let's not attack certain players. Let's try to think about how there's solutions that need to be created in a way that's beneficial for everyone to benefit.
I mean, you hit on a number of key components to healthcare access within areas like oncology, obviously areas like early detection and screening, which hopefully, knock on wood, will only get better and better based on things like AI-driven diagnostics, community-based screening programs that are being introduced, and a number of others. But then there's things like reducing financial barriers, things like increasing clinical trial participation. How do we expand things like oncology care in underserved areas? The list goes on. Out of curiosity, like, what do you see as the most important if you had to choose like top three? Which three would you focus on if you had to pick the top three for improving let's just call it healthcare access within oncology?
Yeah, if I were to start at the very top, and this is again just off the top of my head, I do think that diagnosis and screening is super important. And I'll give one example. Colon cancer is still a big killer of many people. Your digestive tract, the colon, critical part. And unfortunately, colon cancer rates in certain demographics have been increasing over the last 10 years. It's great that in certain demographics of older patients, they've actually come down, but in slightly younger groups, it's a little startling. We see an increase in the rates of colon cancer. So why is that? Listen, there are a lot of reasons. I don't profess to have the answer. Someone might argue diet, lifestyle, who knows all the reasons. But the fact is, if colon cancer rates are going up, it's so important to get screened. And this is not the most obvious thing to screen. It's interesting. The guidelines changed to reduce the screening age from 50 to 45. Not everyone is aware of that. Not everyone is aware of getting screened at 50. And so now you have the guidelines have moved. Data has shown that earlier detection is better. You have a better chance of defeating it and getting a better survival. Yet most people are probably not aware, and their physicians may not be reminding them and aggressively reminding them you need to get this done because it's not a fun process. When you get a colon cancer screening, it's definitely not fun. I had one done recently, and it's a process. But I was happy I did it because they found something. And now, not that I'm a high risk, but I'm a higher risk,
Yeah.
and now I'll be aware. And I think these are the kind of things that we can make a super big impact on just screening, diagnosis, and literacy of the importance of it, which is another great thing because it drives people to their primary care physician for annual checkups, not just for cancer, but for heart issues or diabetes or hypertension. These are all important things. So getting that annual health screening, I think if we can just do that, not only will it help in cancer, will help just across the board of using preventative care in the best place it can before we avoid problems. And that's not me saying that as a life science business person. That's me saying as a societal person, I would rather people get healthcare screenings and treat prophylactically, prevention, versus treating when they have an issue. That would be better for society in total. And that will reduce the cost of healthcare if we do a better job of that because we're preventing versus treating problems. So that's the number one thing. I think the second thing, how do we continue to ensure that there are the right incentives for our industry to continue to innovate and bring meaningful therapies to people? And I say that because there's a lot of risk and there's a lot of intensive R&D money required to develop therapies. And once you bring the market to educate people around them and how people have access. And so again, it's not a zero-sum game in that, our model in the US has been very successful for profit. The biotech industry has been highly productive and innovative because of the model we have in the US. And so how do we find a way to preserve that in a way that continues to incentivize companies to take risk and take big bets? Because without those big bets, we won't see the innovations of tomorrow that we've seen the last 20, 30 years. And so how do we find that in a way that's also then, is manageable within our healthcare construct that continues to have a partnership between government and private industry that's been very symbiotic and very successful in the US? And how do we continue to keep that dialogue and joining together? I think that's super important for us as an industry and as a society, because the society in total benefits or society doesn't benefit. Because if the industry is not vital and healthy, we don't know which therapies we won't have tomorrow or 5 years or 10 years from now. So that's the second thing. I think the third thing, if I were to just say, how do we continue to think about the equity of healthcare delivery? And that means, not just of the people that have health insurance, but those who may not have different degrees of health insurance and coverage and access, and the ability to go reach out and get diagnosis and screenings, and teaching around literacy of the value of that and the importance of that. And so I think this gets into social determinants of health, and how do we ensure that, that healthcare delivery and access is there across the board everywhere in a way that's, easy to access and useful for people. And we have a lot of work, and in some level, just to be a realist, it doesn't mean it's going to be equal for everyone, but we just need to have some common denominator of health access for people at a base level.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing I want to point out quickly is I always tell people that there's a difference between I break it down into I say there's healthcare and then there's medical care, right? Healthcare is everything that you're hitting on, right? Which is the social determinants of health, i.e., the foods that we eat, the environments that we're in, and the list goes on, right? Medical care is unfortunately when you receive that diagnosis or you're seeking that diagnostic and you need to intervene with medical care to receive it. The analogy I like to give is, if you were if another I'm going on an analogy spree today, I guess, but it's almost like healthcare is, imagine a river, and healthcare is medical care would be you see someone. I'm sitting as a lifeguard, i.e., as a physician on the side of the river. I see that someone can't swim and is drowning. My job is to jump in the river and to bring them to shore and to make sure that they're okay. Healthcare is looking upstream. It's why are they falling in the river in the first place, and or why can't they swim? It's all of the prevention strategies that come into place that really you're hitting on as some of the most important areas for different ways that the industry can intervene to provide more awareness information, whether it's lifestyle and behavioral changes, and other changes that we can make in reducing things like negative externalities through negative environmental impacts, et cetera. So they're all very important themes, and honestly, we can do a whole deep dive podcast just on any number of these single themes alone. Now, Beezer, let me ask you this. How do you think about really the evolution of oncology care as it pertains to next generation therapeutics? And what role do you see when it comes to that next generation of oncology therapeutic treatment options?
Yeah, so I'll be a little bit more micro, and let's assume that, I won't talk about as much around prevention, screening, diagnosis. And this is where, again, as we think about this new product we just launched, but any of our products, this is where I think the world and intersectionality of the tech, what's happening in the tech world and what's happening in big data and AI and all these things, you start to see convergence. And maybe the healthcare industry is a little bit slower to adopt some of these for a lot of reasons around regulations and the way data has to be protected for patients. But in particular, we're starting to see it. And so now, it's not only about having a great therapy that can go beyond current technologies and what we can do. And so that's the kind of innovation in the lab, building out that science and that biology and building therapies that kind of meet that. But now, how do we get better at identifying when those patients present and then reducing the amount of time to get them that therapy? And that's where the world of big data is coming in. I mean, my team and I have talked to some of our biggest customers as we launch this product. And, these are large community oncology networks. And by the way, they're really important because the far majority of patients actually receive their cancer care in the community setting not the academic. The academic is very important, but most people want to stay in their local environment and not travel far away to academic centers. So they're both important for different reasons. However, when we talk to some of these community oncology big providers in various parts of the country, they have a lot of data, and they've talked about how they can use their data and mine that data to identify patients that have diagnoses, that have the biomarker, that have the test that may not be obvious and may not be linked, but someone needs to start linking it together. And launching a new therapy, a biomarker driven therapy, which we've done, gives the impetus or motivation for some of these providers to say, oh, now I have a great solution. Now how do I accelerate the patient identification and an appropriate patient that could benefit from this, instead of letting that happen maybe in a little more random way? Can we be better? Can we be more intentional about it? Can we be faster? And that's where I think the power of industry working with some of these providers, like we're trying to engage with some of our customers on how we do look at real world data, how they look at the data in their systems. They run the analytics. We might help them, give them some parameters, but they protect the data. They do it. But again, that's a win-win, because if they can treat these patients earlier with better therapies, that's great. That benefits us because our product gets used for the appropriate patient. And that's a win-win. But this is all based on this precedent of we're able to look at data, aggregate it, analyze it, and do things in a more powerful, sophisticated way than the old, oh, I had this piece of paper and I had their chart. Let me go back and look at their chart, but I got busy doing 15 other patient calls, and then it never happened. That's the world of the old. How do we start getting to the world of the new, where let these systems do that a lot more, all the grunt work or busy work to help the clinicians make the best decision at that point in time?
Well said. Beezer, this has been a lot of fun. I cannot thank you enough for taking the time. I feel like we have to do a follow-up for sure, just
Yes.
given the number of topics and themes I want to go deeper on, and even topics and themes we didn't even have a chance to hit on today. But I can't thank you enough for joining us today, and looking forward to the next conversation.
Great. Well, Chase, I appreciate the opportunity to do this. It's really been great to talk to you and your audiences, and hopefully this has been helpful. So thank you.